Hi there, welcome back. My name is Dr. Larry Chu, and along with Dr. Kyra Babinet, my co-director for this course, I want to welcome you back to Design for Health, a new course from the Stanford School of Medicine on design thinking as a driver of healthcare innovation. Super excited to have you back to join us tonight for this episode. We're going to be talking about designing for physical environments in healthcare. We have a great bunch of speakers with us tonight. David Ruthven from Next Health is going to talk about his work in designing physical spaces. And also we have with us Joe Ruffey, one of our Stanford Medicine X e-patient scholars. He's going to start things off in just a moment. And I want to share with you a little bit of his bio. Joe, back in May of 2011, fell on a hike, and after many decisions, decided to have his leg amputated as a result of that injury. That allowed him to get back to work as a paramedic, and he now focuses his time on amputee right activism and advocacy, motivational speaking. He's writing a book and also helping new and old amputees see what's possible. So we're going to hear from Joe in just a second, but first a quick message from Medicine X. If you are joining us for the first time, a quick reminder that there's a simultaneous conversation happening on Twitter right now using the hashtag MedX. Christopher Schneider is the in-class moderator for today's program and will be taking questions from social media. So please make sure to start up your Twitter client to join in the online conversation and interact with today's speakers. Christopher Schneider, also known as I Am Spartacus, is moderating the online tweet chat discussion this evening. We also wish to remind you that registration for Medicine X 2014 is now open. Don't miss the year's premier patient-centered conference on emerging technology and medicine. Unique opportunities such as our masterclass program and our IDEO Design Challenge workshop have extremely limited space availability. You'll want to make sure to take advantage of these programs while our regular registration pricing is still available until August 1st, 2014. Please also make sure to follow our YouTube page at www.youtube.com/Stanford Medicine X. Please note, you are watching a live online program, and there's a delay between real-time events and the live stream you are watching. Tweets from our in-class guests will appear before you see the real-time events they are tweeting about unfold on the video live stream.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Joe Rife, also known online as the Prosthetic Medic, for obvious reasons. But I want to thank you guys for letting me be here. So wonderful to be back at Stanford again. I spoke here last year at the Medicine X conference. It's one of the greatest experiences I've had. So thank you all for letting me be here. And today I want to talk to you about patient-centered design and prosthetics. So first off, why I'm here. I'm a left above knee amputee. I had a voluntary amputation, and the reason for this amputation was I fell 110 feet off of a waterfall. For those keeping track at home, that's 11 stories. So what does a fall from 110 feet look like? For you guys, to let you know, this next slide is a little graphic, but here's kind of an example of what I went through. Oh, after I introduce myself again, here's where you can find me online at Prosthetic Medic, or my website, prostheticmedic.com, or my blog, prostheticmedic.blogspot.com. So, as Dr. Chu said, I'm an advocate and activist for insurance fairness. Right now, insurance companies don't want to pay for prosthetics. They want to pay for the prosthetic they want, not the ones that we deserve and need. I'm also an e-patient, a public speaker, and a paramedic in my spare time. So this is what it looks like after a 110-foot fall. A few injuries that I had: I severed my popliteal artery, I tore my ACL, my MCL, my LCL, my meniscus, a femur fracture, a tib fib fracture, an open ankle dislocation, compartment syndrome to go along with the artery bleed, as well as other various bumps, bruises, and abrasions. Actually, here, if you look on the side of the screen where the waterfall is, that is where I fell from. So the importance of patient design. In patient-centered design, it's customizable to your patient. It allows your patient to retain some of their individuality. Most used example in this is the prosthetic socket. It's the interface that allows us to connect to the prosthetic itself. Those are individually made for everyone. For non-patient centered, the prosthetic itself. That is generally cookie cutter design. It's the same for every patient, no matter what. There's a paradigm shift happening in this, though. For now, we're getting to the world of 3D printing, where amputees are making their own prosthetics. For example, this is the Michelangelo hand by Autobach. It's myoelectric, so it connects to their arm, reads muscle impulses, and moves that way. It costs about $74,000. The hand on the bottom is from the Open Hand Project. It does almost the same thing as the Autobach hand for a tag of about $1,000. So now patients are able to go in, design a hand, make it individual, and do the same thing. Another example of this for us lower extremity people is the Bartlett knee, along with 3D printed sockets. The Bartlett knee is amazing. The gentleman on the right is Brian Bartlett. He is a downhill BMX rider. He lost his leg in a BMX accident and decided, you know what? None of the knees out there will do what I want them to do. I want to get back on my bike and I want to ride. Nothing's going to let me, so I'm going to make it myself. So he went out and designed this knee. It's made out of, the original one was made out of cams and hydraulics he had for his motorcycles and bicycles. The difference is the tendons that are attaching to the socket itself. Those tendons allow him to extend his foot, something that he would not be able to do otherwise. For me with my prosthetic, I cannot extend my foot other than by the pendulum swing. For him, it was so important that he went and made something to do it. And this is where we're getting in now with medicine and with amputees. We're making our own to do what we need them to do since insurance won't provide them. So there's more amputees than you see in the Paralympics and Oscar Pistorius or Amy Purdy on Dancing with the Stars. There are more of us out there. In fact, there are about 2 million amputees in the United States. Every day, about 5 more people, every hour, about 5 more people have an amputation. So, we are now changing our own destinies. We're not disabled, we're not handicapped. We are the interface of technology and biology. We are bionics in action. We are the human interface of technology now. This is where we're going, from the start of prosthetics to the future. It started out with just using a crutch, to the peg leg, to a leg like mine, to where in the future you shouldn't be able to tell whether I have an amputee or not. As an example of what we're capable of, here's me at work, and there's my mentor. This is Kevin Trees. He's a police sergeant with Louisville Metro. He is a right above knee amputee. We are 2 of the first in public safety to return to work as above knee amputees. So I want to thank you guys for allowing me to be here and tell you a little bit about my story. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is David Ruthven. He's an award-winning architect whose focus is on healthcare environments and technology and has yielded many unique design solutions. His current work, the Patient Room 2020 project, has a fellowship, the 2020 project as a fellowship recipient at Innovation's nonprofit Next Health has been featured in Metropolis, Fast Company, Contract Magazine, and Architizer. He previously worked as the renowned architect from the firm Smith Group and earned a master's from Clemson University Architecture and the Health Program. But first, we're going to have another word from Medicine X.
Time to take another shout out to Twitter. If you are following this conversation online or on Twitter, Christopher Snyder, otherwise known as I Am Spartacus, is moderating the Twitter discussion on the MedX hashtag. If you are just joining us, we have with us today David Ruthven from Patient Room 2020, speaking with us today on the topic Designing for the Physical Environment. E-patients and caregivers out there, what questions do you have for our speaker today? How do physical environments influence the quality of care you receive and the health choices that you make? Healthcare providers, technologists, and researchers out there, what factors are important when designing an environment that is patient-centered? Tweet us your questions or responses, and we'll do our best to have them addressed during this class in the Stanford School of Medicine course, Design for Health, for Thursday, May 22nd, 2014.
Hi, well, my name is David Ruthven, and I am with a nonprofit design group called Next Health. I'm by training an architect. Thank you for having me here. I'm really excited. Anytime you get a chance to come out to somewhere like Stanford, it's exciting. So I'm really happy to be here and share some of our work with you. The first thing that I did before I came here, I was thinking, is like, how do I show what an architect is, or some of my heroes that I studied in school? And what I realized is that architects look sort of evil. They all kind of look the same, and I'm like, what does this say about my future? I'm going to go bald and get unhappy and turn into Dr. Evil. But I think that architecture it's a very diverse field, and I think what you'll see is that I'm supposed to be talking about the built environment, but the built environment can also serve as a vehicle to create change in other areas as well. So our group, really, our whole goal is to push new ideas into healthcare and to create a situation where we can think freely and we can take risks and we don't fear failure. So when you're trying to implement things in a live hospital setting, you run into a lot of challenges. So we've essentially kind of stripped all those things away and thought about, well, what do we really want to design for tomorrow, and what is the optimized state that the healthcare system really needs to get into and to become very sustainable and grow into the future. So we're all very familiar with kind of the current state. It varies per facility, but I think there's a lot of similarities. And in some cases, it's hard even to locate the patient in this kind of sea of clutter. And you almost feel like you're caring for someone in a garage. And the experience of that person going through this traumatic event, in many cases, it really is complicated. And all these things kind of come to a head in the physical environment. So what we really like to do is think about, well, when we begin to strip these layers away and begin to simplify and overlap and integrate, how can we not necessarily completely radically transform that experience, but make it more humane, make it more efficient and more optimized to improve the overall delivery of care. So the place really for us, this idea of place is really a vehicle to look at people, processes, and products and how they all interact in an overall experience. So it's never just about the architecture, just like it's never just about one magical bullet in a product. It's about how those things converge in a unified experience. So really what's great about Next is because we are a nonprofit, we really can tap into a lot of really smart people and put them around the table and begin to vet and really bring in experts in construction or people that have gone through the MIT Media Center, former doctors or providers, or speak with patients or bring in different types of designers and really enrich the process. And we organize these teams around kind of these simple ideas, like what should a patient room be in the 21st century? We know what it is now, but really where do we think that should go? So really, why a patient room? Well, Next Health, when it first started, was essentially an innovations offshoot of a hospital in South Carolina. And when I was a graduate student at Clemson, we actually conceptualized, prototyped, and built a hospital room design. So there was a lot of existing research, post-occupancy studies, meeting with patient advocacy groups, meeting with different constituencies at the hospital. So the Patient Room 2020 project that I'm about to show you really was born out of that and out of grant funding that the organization secured to look at the future of care. So the first thing that we did was we re-immersed ourselves in the environment, and this image really, it's not very descriptive, but what I wanted to illustrate here is that most of the hospitals we went to, they said, do not take photos of patients, do not talk to patients, don't take photos of staff. So it was very limiting what we were able to actually look at, but we understand, I know you were talking about empathy earlier, it's really important to be able to empathize with what we see as the key constituency here, which is the patients. So we did the best we could. We did observational research. We did kind of off-the-record interviews. But really, we were only allowed to document these kind of different needs that we saw in different opportunity areas. This is an example here of an overbed table. So this is covered with crap. They're doing a tracheotomy on someone. And this was the surface that's supposed to be for them to eat dinner off of. And it's got medical waste all over it. So what this says is this is an opportunity for improvement. The staff don't have enough space. They're dropping supplies on the patient or using this table. So those are kind of the things that we are looking for in the environment. So we created essentially these kind of gateposts, if you will, that no matter where we are in the design process, we could always go back to these 5 things and ask ourselves, okay, are these needs being addressed? Does this improve infection control or does it hinder it? are we really engaging with families, or is this creating barriers between them working with caregivers? So this is the concept that we came up with. I'm going to, unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, I will have to go back and forth, which is not distracting at all, I'm sure. So the concept that we came up with, we created this animation of the overview, and we really, again, started from scratch and looked at what kind of processes could we establish in this room, and where these technology touch points kind of interact with the actual architecture. So we looked at here, this was kind of a system for delivering medications delivered from the hallway. See here how the overbed table has actually been connected to the foot wall, so that could be used for education, for training. We again looked at the bathroom and how the bathroom design could facilitate not only safe transfer from the bed, but how to kind of integrate technology in there. And then again, really looking at simplifying the space and adding a few main gestures, but packing them with functionality and integrating a patient lift and head wall together into kind of one seamless element. So really this space, we tried to keep it as compact as possible and pack as much functionality in there so that it was adaptable, but at the same time, everything kind of always went back to the patient and how this would impact the patient experience. Even things we did for caregivers, we knew that a happy caregiver makes happy patients. So we always were kind of thinking in that way. So when the project concluded, really for me, this was kind of a modern day garage project, if you will. The project actually concluded in 2010. So just to give you context, the iPad didn't exist. It was about to be released. Gas was $2.73, which I put in here specifically to make people angry because I know gas here is like $10. And the other thing was Biebs made his breakout then. So, he wasn't in jail yet. He was just young and innocent at that point. So that was, at that point for me, it was a big decision. It was, let's make this happen, right? We wanted to, and we kind of just went into it full head of steam. And during the next 2 years, from 2011 to 2013, we worked to secure space. So this is the DuPont Corning Design Studio in New York to build the prototype. And then we also worked to assemble kind of this large team of different companies in varying capacities. So we were either working directly with companies to integrate existing products or develop new products, and then in some cases just receiving their either skills and expertise or raw goods and materials. So this is the actual space that was built. It's a lot easier to render something than actually build something. That's what I found. Because a lot of the details just have to work, right? And this really, for us, was a great way to take what really was a schematic design in the conceptual phase and push it a little bit further and try some new things. Oops. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the basic architectural moves that we did and talk to you a bit about that and why we've done that. Some of it I think people take for granted, but for example, single occupancy rooms, right? That was, right now, is pretty much a standard. For privacy, it's not great to have two very sick people in the same room for obvious reasons. So we definitely wanted to do that. We also went with a mirrored layout. There's definitely been a movement in some areas towards same-handed, which means the rooms kind of are always the same, repetitious. But with mirrored, there's some architectural advantages. You can stack services and create a more compact layout. And really, the jury's still out, too, on the research, whether same-handed makes any difference or not. In terms of the base sizing, structure is really a key driver in any building design, but especially in hospitals. So we wanted to have a realistic structural system to kind of start with. So 16-foot bay, which is a 32-foot overall foot bay, is really what you'd see in most typical new construction. I'm not sure what the new hospital is. It might be a little less than that, but we wanted to use that as kind of a constraint for the design. And then the other key driver that you always see is the toilet room. So the toilet room, there's all kinds of flavors of that, but we wanted to put the toilet on the inboard side because we see that as actually something that needs to be very accessible to staff. Because you know that one of the main reasons people get hurt is they fall going to the bathroom. So we wanted to put it closer to where the staff were and also open up more exterior space. For windows, so this is, again, the floor plan of the actual space at the end that we ended up with. And then what I've done here is overlaid it onto the prototype. So we did not have enough room to build the whole space. We did not have a view of the skyline of San Francisco like the rendering. What we did have was a back corner with a fire exit. So what you see here is about 2/3 of the actual design. We decided to build the bathroom, the entry sequence, and then, of course, the patient care areas. So I'm just going to quickly do a walkthrough and show you some of the key highlights in the space. And really, we wanted to, as much as possible, simulate one-to-one what it would actually be. So we really wanted to build things out exactly as they would be in real life. So the first thing that we looked at was how to take what right now is just a simple sink and make it more of a system. So we've actually integrated lighting and technology here to facilitate not only visual awareness that you need to wash your hands, but to put data in front of caregivers when they're going through that process, and then have visual cues so they know they've completed that. The other benefit to this system is that from the bedside, it's not glaring, but you get a very subtle kind of cue, and you can see if the caregiver has washed their hands or not. So this isn't, again, kind of a gotcha thing. It's more positive reinforcement from knowing that the patients know you didn't wash your hands, and also using this kind of caregiver dashboard above the sink to think about it in terms of gamification. So what if you could actually see real time what the rates were, how the nurses stack up against the doctors for the day. So you have healthy competition, you have positive reinforcement to do a process which I think we can all agree is necessary, but not maybe the funnest thing in the world to do 1,000 times a day. So the next thing we noticed from there is that people would basically go through this process to sterilize their hands. And then they would venture into patient room and touch a piece of technology that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. And I think you see a lot of computers that were designed to be in someone's home just placed in a hospital, which is just a fundamentally different type of environment. So the bedside workstation, we're not only thinking about how to create this kind of integrated experience, and this is what we've created here is essentially like a work triangle with clean supply and waste all integrated, but that you can see here as it closes, there's actually UV light that's activated. So everything is cleaned from the keyboard to the demountable tablet system that you can walk around the room with. So we're not adding steps here to a nurse's process. We're just integrating technology and building into existing processes that already exist to make them safer and make them more efficient. So I think that was another key thing that we looked at, is that sometimes adding more layers to something, adding more features to something is not that advantageous. So we wanted to really simplify things and take steps away as much as possible. So adding another step in that would actually clean something or had the nurses would have to do it themselves really just didn't seem very intuitive. It seemed like they would just skip doing it, or that it would never get done kind of 100%. So we wanted to build in a setting where it would just happen automatically. Another area that we looked at a lot was the bathroom. And we learned a lot from post-occupancy research, interviewing patients about the original design. And people loved that the room was spacious, and mainly that was because the bathroom was small, but they hate using the bathroom. And especially the staff hated using it. Because really a bathroom in a hospital is not like anywhere else. It's actually a procedure space in our opinion. You have multiple assist staff, you have people monitoring, you have IV poles, wheelchairs, tons of equipment. So what you see here, what our handsome architect has unveiled, is that you can completely deploy the doors really in a series of configurations to assist in various types of toileting events or showering events that you would have in that space. So we wanted to have it be a very elegant, well-designed space, but also at the end of the day, it's always getting back to kind of what is a bathroom really in a hospital. So the element that wraps the space called the patient ribbon that you saw, one of the things I wanted to bring up here, one of the key elements of that was what we call our patient halo. And this, it may be a little bit difficult to see, but we wanted to not only use lighting in a way throughout the project that could add kind of therapeutic elements, but also procedural elements. So the first thing you saw was for visual impairment. You can use color to actually understand what things people can see. So we use light basically to do different types of procedures and testing. And there's actually presets throughout the entire space to do that. For procedural lighting, for example, is a cool tone versus assessment lighting, which has a warm tone so that it illuminates the skin. So there's actually a series of presets here. And this also serves as right now what is simulated, it's not UV, it's just purple, but as for a cleaning function. So that really what we wanted to do is essentially have the room kind of wash itself and have a cleaning mode that maybe not necessarily will get 100% of the infection, but it could do some degree of sterilization and also illuminate areas that needed to be cleaned. So this is just a really quick overview of some of the key features. I could talk forever about the detailing and things on this, but I think really what I wanted to focus on here, and really again, I think I said in the beginning, this was all about architecture maybe by title, but what it ended up happening is we had these really key interventions that in turn ended up being products and almost processes that were a resultant of this kind of larger architectural initiative. One of them was the patient companion. So if you remember back that example I showed of all the crap all over the overbed table, we knew that having technology in the room is fantastic, but if people can't control any of it while they're in bed sick, it's demeaning, right? You feel stuck, you feel isolated, and there's all these things around you can't control. So we wanted to reimagine this as not just a piece of dumb furniture, that it actually was literally someone's companion throughout care, and that there was elements built into this that people in the 21st century need, from cell phone charging to actually having a tablet built into the top that you could rotate and have access to. So for us, really, that video is not going to work, so I'll skip it. The patient companion itself was really a product that we developed really just internally. There's nothing like that we could find. And we saw this as this kind of blank slate to work on from a digital standpoint and began to think about, well, what kinds of cool kind of technology could you, or apps could you put in here? This is just simulating kind of lighting controls, but we thought this would be a great way to train patients and families and actually use this, for example, to instead of just taking someone's blood pressure, you could plug a blood pressure cuff into this and actually train them how to use it. And when they leave, they take that with them. So that you're not just treating them, you're empowering them and training them at the same time. And then I think also, of course, connecting with who's the next person in line that's going to help me is very vital, because we know in the future, hospitals are going to be really for just the very, very sick. So I think that people love to just know who's going to be helping them or have an idea of that, and really there's this emergence in kind of prevention and keeping people on track and caring for them that's coming back around. So we also saw this as a way to create connections for people as well. And then, of course, this just shows, again, one thing we just noticed is a very simple problem. People have cell phones, right? And in the hospital, I can't get out of bed, plugs across the room. People were getting injured trying to get up to charge their cell phone or answer their cell phone. So we looked at a way to integrate that at the bedside. Here, this actually has power mat technology built into the solid surface so that you don't even need a cord. But really, again, it was more about the kind of convenience and putting that right where people need it. And then this is actually an integrated touchscreen for the television. So we looked at, in the environment, we had kind of our top 5 most wanted infection control issues. And I hate to break it to you, but if you go to a hotel, don't touch the TV remote because it's disgusting. And in hospitals, it's 10 times worse. So our whole idea with that was, why don't we just get rid of it? And I know it's a convenience. How can we balance that convenience with safety? So again, the companion has this kind of interface built flush into it so you can access it very quickly, but that it's easy to clean and maintain. Another thing that that it was interesting, we were talking about earlier about the gowns, right, and how demeaning the gowns were. And we actually integrated into this competition to design new nursing scrubs. And part of the reason for that is, again, we know that infection control, a lot of the transmission happens through people's clothing. So we wanted to start with the scrubs and begin to think about, well, how could you design something as simple as that differently? So we looked at using a fabric called BioSmart, which is, I won't get into too much of the technical jargon, but basically if it's washed in a certain way, it kills infection. So you can't just throw it in a normal washing machine. I think it has a chlorine mix or something you have to do. But what we were saying is in the future, you wouldn't show up to work dressed. You would show up to work and get your clothing out of some sort of machine, dress, and then be ready. So my wife is a nurse, and she's sitting on her couch in her scrubs. It's like, kind of freaks me out a little bit. So this is the idea here was that let's attack this thing from every possible point we can, and we felt like this was one. So we partnered up with Milliken to get the fabric and a scrub manufacturer, Healing Hands, to build some mock-ups of these. And it was really exciting because we had a lot of fashion designers in this, right? So again, it started as architecture, but in the end, we had fashion designers, and we had all these different types of creative people kind of plugging into this effort. So this gets back to really, we just asked this one simple question, right? And we really just stripped away all the kind of conceptions that we had of that place, and we knew some things that we wanted to bring in from the previous effort, but we really started with kind of an open mind and worked our way into what we have now. And really, I think what's exciting about this project to me is that there's definitely parts and pieces that are interesting, but to me what people are really attracted to is kind of the whole picture, the whole experience, and it really serves us as a vehicle to kind of look at parts. And one of my favorite comments is that this is an Obamacare plot. I had to point that out because I can't help but read the comments online, and apparently we're in cahoots with Obama on this, but that's not the case. It really for us was just about creating this situation where people could come and have fun and create new things. So what's next for us? We're continuing to develop things in the room. It's not a static installation. We're constantly trying to refine and update things. And we're also working on doing things like this and really working with local hospitals too on kind of beginning to think about design. And I mean, I think what Dr. Chu is doing here is fantastic because I think it really can enable you to think differently about what you do. And when something's wrong, you have the power to fix it. You just have to approach it in a different way. I mean, you can't just start throwing solutions at something. You need to step back, take a breath, and really figure out what the needs are. And I think that's probably what you've heard from several of the other speakers. I know IDEO is really great at talking about that, but it's true. And I think that for us, this project is just kind of a container, and all of these different parts and pieces fit into that. But it's kind of an evolving story that we see. There's lots of different things we could plug in here. So for example, refining that hand washing system and thinking about different users. You don't really need to wash your hands every time. Maybe if you just pop in, you want to say hello to someone, you don't need to wash your hands, for example. To how can we look at the floor plane? The floor plane is the most interacted with plane in any building, which makes it a great way to get data, right? Because people are constantly on that. People are falling on it. Caregivers are traveling looking for supplies, so we're working with a company called Target to put that in there and begin to simulate how could you use that in a hospital, which is pretty exciting. And then the other thing we're really looking at is how do we upgrade the technology and really make the clickable apps kind of come to life and tailor them so that, right now it's just my Fitbit on there. And that's fantastic, but I think there's so much more potential to that. And you hear a lot of, big data is kind of the term, and to me it's not about big data, it's about beautiful data. And how do you take that and make it usable? Because otherwise it's just overwhelming to people. So we're really trying to think about that as well. So this is where the hospital beta test image would go, and there isn't one because we're not doing that. We would love to do that, and really we're working a lot in the New York area to find people that are interested. And for us, I think it's very important for some of these things to have a life beyond the prototype, because we really ultimately, as fancy and futuristic as it is, at the core, we really just want to help people and improve the patient experience. So really for us, we see the sky's the limit. I think there's a lot of other environments that could go through this process, and really we could discover some exciting things. So that's really the next step for us, is to begin to look at that. So just to kind of summarize here and bring it back around, I think that we've talked about this a good bit already today, but really don't just focus on one part or piece. Think about what is the whole experience, and sometimes you might even figure out that you can just remove that altogether, and it's actually something else that you didn't even think about. And I think that it goes without saying, really having empathy, and I think just being in healthcare, you already have that innately anyway, but really harnessing that as a way to understand other perspectives and add some depth and dimension to what you do is very important. And then I think, you know, my mentor in college, in the master's program I went through, really his thing was always simplify and overlap. How can you remove steps but not reduce functionality? How can you take 5 things and make them 1? You know, and really I think that in healthcare, more than anywhere else, right, that's necessary, because it's the abundance of crap, right? You just go in anywhere and it's like, let's just put another monitor up, or let's just buy another 5 carts and push them in there. So I think there's a better way to do it. You just need to approach things maybe a little differently. So again, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here, and you know, I guess open up to questions.
For you from Twitter was sent in, so we'll start with that. So the first question we got was, let me get Chris stuff up. Of all the design decisions for this concept hospital room, they're wonderful, but how do you make this cost effective for an existing hospital?
It's a great question, and we hear that constantly. It's like, this is great, but it's too expensive, right, immediately. And I think that you can't afford not to do something like this, is the way I look at it. And hospitals spend a lot of money on a lot of things, and it's always about return on investment. And I think some of the design decisions you made there, yes, on the front end it will cost a little more, but you're going to see such a return on that. You know, the way I always frame it is, do you want to pay for litigation down the line, or for the staff burnout and turnover, or for, you know, your nurses that leave because they threw their back out because they don't have a patient lift or they can't use it? Or would you rather put that on the front end and pay for a facility that's going to last longer and pay for things that are going to kind of help people? The other thing we did look at, just from a nuts and bolts perspective, is I think that we always treated this room almost like a car, and we treated it like a concept car, right? And that it was something that would have to be prefabricated, which in healthcare, actually, there's precedence for it. In Europe, the contractor Skanska we worked with constructed an entire hospital and then plugged all the patient rooms in, and literally they have a video of them just plugging them in. So it's possible to build the rooms in a factory setting where you can get the construction fidelity and you can get the cost savings and the efficiencies. They were punch listing these rooms months before even some of the structure was up. It was amazing. So I think that, again, it's about approaching things differently. If you're going to do this conventional stick-built, you're going to get buried. The rooms aren't going to perform right. It's not going to be effective, but you have to embrace kind of new technologies to get there.
Open up the room. Anybody here have any questions for me or him?
I have a question about, have you been able to approach like patients or nurses or any sort of healthcare providers? Because while the technologies are absolutely phenomenal, I know from maybe a patient's perspective is like not being able to figure out that if you set your phone here, it's going to charge, or like where the remote is or how to use the technology. And from maybe the nurse's perspective, taking an extra 10 or more minutes to constantly explain to patients how to use the room that they're in.
Right. Well, that's a great question. That was one thing we looked at, was actually creating kind of this concierge for people that would go around, you know, and help people orient them. And we also looked at, you know, what are nurses being bothered with that they shouldn't be doing, and how can we eliminate that? And a lot of it had to do with basic like lighting controls, sound controls, environmental controls. So by putting that at the bedside, we're kind of allowing them to do primary care, which is what they want to do. But from a technology standpoint and orienting them, we definitely probably would have some degree of training or have someone whose role, you know, think of the kind of like the Apple Genius Bar, right? You know, like they knew that all these people are having problems with technology. So instead of just setting up a better phone system, now they have a process in place for that, to embrace it.
Hi, thanks. So you have a lot of display surface area, both for the patient and the care providers, and you talked about making data beautiful and things like this, and I'm just wondering if you have any examples or stories that you can share with us about how you bring meaningful data to the surface for either of those groups of people.
Well, one thing to point out, and it wasn't in the prototype, it was in the animation, was you actually had a lot of augmented data. So one of the concepts was that instead of having tons and tons of monitors everywhere, you would actually have technology that when a caregiver comes in, a doctor comes in, certain data is available to them by way of this kind of like a Google Glass, essentially, type setup. But in terms of what data specifically that was, that's something we're getting into right now. And really, data is, again, big data is kind of a bit scary. I mean, it's overwhelming. You see like what IBM's doing, and they have these crazy swirls and stuff. And it's fantastic, but at the end of the day, how do you use all that? And I think at the point of care, how it's all distilled down into some simple, tangible piece of information is absolutely critical. Because otherwise it's just noise, and they're just being bombarded with noise. So, for example, at the hand washing sink, just having an understanding of how you're doing with hand washing that day, or how others are doing, or having a scheduled procedure and coming in and that procedure is already up, because it knows who you are via RFID tag. So things are automated, and it's simplifying, processes for them and helping caregivers kind of work seamlessly.
Do you think that designing communal spaces is also important when considering the hospital environment? And when I say communal spaces, I mean for patients. And if so, how would you bring this kind of technology to that kind of space?
That's a great question, and we did not look outside of kind of the walls of the room. And I'm not saying that because I don't advocate for kind of communal spaces. I think they're critical, especially in certain types of care, for oncology, for example. People are aware, they want to talk to other people in similar situations. So the way that we approached it in the actual space was that, again, the patient companion would have technology in there for digital community, so that you would immediately kind of have access, if you wanted, into a chat room, I guess, for lack of a better term, to meet people that were kind of going through the same thing you were. Because even if you have family in the room, you can't really talk to them in the same way you can talk to someone who also has extreme pain and has a similar kind of situation as you. So we wanted to balance kind of actual human connection with being able to tap into kind of a much larger community of people as well.
I'll go. So I actually had a question about prosthetics. So since we're talking about data and how you guys gathered data about hospital rooms from various situations, I'm curious, like for prosthetics, like does the industry currently have good feedback loops from? Because you mentioned that like the BMXer, like he had to design his own thing.
The feedback loops are there. The example I can give is the company that makes my prosthetic. It's a German company called Autobach. They got most of their data from VA. So they did a lot with soldiers that had lost limbs. They got most of their data from there. There are a few companies that are looking at more real-world application, as in, your average amputee, not a Paralympian, not a soldier, just, your average person walking down the street and how they need to use the limb. But what they found is, if they're focusing on a soldier, the first thing that soldier wants to do is his basic ADLs. Before he wants to get back to war, he wants to walk. He wants to be able to, pick up his kids. He wants to do whatever, his basic ADLs first. And so a lot of the input's coming from there, and then you have people that will just call them up and say, here's what we want. For instance, the knee that I have is the Autobach Genium. It is not waterproof. It's water resistant, so if my kids splash me with the water hose, it's fine. But if they jump into the pool and I have to jump in and save them, it's not. So what they did is they made a newer version that has the two things they were asked for most. It does everything this one does, but it also has a mode so we can run, and has a mode that made it completely waterproof up to 30 meters. So some companies are listening. Anyone else? Ma'am, you had a question?
I think too, that seems like something that'd be perfect for like this kind of Internet of Things idea. Like everything's going to talk to everything else. It seems like, prosthetics would be perfect for that, right?
Well, this is actually remote controlled, and they're working on making it a Android and iPhone app, so my knee will talk to my phone and vice versa.
Yeah, that's awesome. Somebody can't hack into it and control it remotely, though.
But they're trying to put it kind of like Fitbit. And there's different modes, like I have a running mode, I have a cycling mode, I have, if I want to play golf, it puts me in the perfect golf stance, which my friends hate because I'm already right there.
Yeah,
They say I'm cheating. But,
well, that's what
so,
you did
yeah.
with Pistorius, right? It was kind of
well,
unfair advantage,
well,
right? That's what they were saying, at least.
Where he's a below knee, the feet that he was using, we all have a certain amount of return of energy when we walk. So when you take a step forward, you go from your heel to your toe actually bounces you forward. For me, there's a huge dead spot in my prosthetic foot. So I go heel completely flat, then I have to use energy to get back up. So as an above knee amputee, I use almost double the energy that you do. So if, me and you go walk for a mile, physiologically I've walked for 2 compared to your 1. So the more energy the return that they can get to the feet, the less energy I expend. So in his case, he had a little bit more energy return than a physiological foot, so they tried to say he was cheating. Ma'am?
Yeah, so I had a comment and a question about the relationship between these great design interventions and the key performance indicators for places like hospitals. So when you're talking with hospital owners and administrators and pitching these design ideas, what are the important ways to connect the design and behavioral outcomes with what the hospital cares most about, like age caps or reduction of average length of stay and stuff like that?
Well, I've had it beat into my head that it's quality improvement and it's cost, safety, satisfaction, right? Or kind of the three, the biggies that you talk to. So that's kind of, we're all saying the same thing. Sometimes it's like how you frame it, right? And I think for us, keeping the patient at the center was always a play towards the satisfaction standpoint. And I think the safety thing is inherent in also being satisfied. I mean, if you fall and shatter your hip, you're not going to be satisfied. So really, I think we tried to use some of that language and terminology, but also not let it kind of plague the process, I guess, especially from a cost standpoint, because I didn't want cost to be the only driving factor, because I've been in so many projects where it is, and it just stifles innovation. And it's a practical reality, but I think, again, it's about how can you save costs in the long term, and sometimes that's completely thrown by the wayside for short-term gains. So.
Go to an online question. At Courage Sings wanted to ask me, how's the journey as a patient impacted my empathy as a medical professional? So prior to my accident, I had a problem of really looking at the patient as their condition, like I'd said earlier in here. If I was going to the scene of a shooting, he was the gunshot wound. I wasn't working on a person, I was working on an injury and a set of problems that I had to go through. It was an algorithm. Afterwards, it got to the point to where, I've been on the other side now, I've been that patient, I've been that nameless person who's just my injury. And it completely changed how I looked at patients. I found myself connecting more and doing more talking and making sure what I needed to get done prior to getting them to the hospital got done. But at the same time, instead of just being quiet and thinking in my head, I did a lot of time talking to the patient and explaining what I was doing instead of just sitting back and, well, I have to put an IV in and starting an IV. Be like, well, I know you're scared, but I'm going to put an IV in now just because, your blood pressure is a little low and I need to give you some fluids to get your blood pressure up. And just taking that extra time to really explain what I'm doing and let them realize that I know this is a terrifying situation, because especially being in the world of EMS, you don't call 911 unless you need us, for the most part. And when we get there, we're seeing you on your worst day. So the last thing you need is for me to get there and be rude and short and crass whenever it's your worst day already. And that's the big thing that it helped me learn. Any other questions in here? Another question from Twitter for you. Said, let me find it. Okay, Courage Sings asked for you, similar to redesigning scrubs, has hospital attire for patients been examined?
So that was, we actually, in the very beginning, that was part of the scope of that competition. We had to scale it back because it just became too much, unfortunately. But that was really, to me, it was a little bit of a letdown, because I felt like, again, there's so much potential there. I'm looking at you because it's Twitter. It's like some nebulous. There's no one to look at to talk to. So,
you can talk to me. That's fine. We'll
but
chat.
yeah, but I think that to me, the patient scrubs is one of the most demeaning things about being in a hospital, right? I mean, no one would ever want to wear that.
It's the loss of identity as well. I mean,
right. So I think, yeah, I would definitely be interested to kind of expand and think about that and look at that a little more closely for sure.
Gentleman in the back again.
Hi, I was curious if you could give us a quick overview, or a long one if you want, about your initial sort of research process, how you made decisions, how much time you had, how much time you spent on certain phases of that to get some of your insights.
Right, yeah, so I did kind of gloss over that because I was kind of jumping right to the end. There was a lot of research and development that went into everything, a lot of observational studies. A lot of that happened, some of it was from the first patient room that we designed with the hospital, so it was kind of a carryover. And then a lot of the research was also a carryover from doing post-occupancy studies to understand, like, okay, is the head wall working as we designed it, doing kind of flow analysis and things like that. And then really a lot of it was, there was a period of about 6 months where we did a ton of observational research, interviews. My wife is a nurse, so I have a little bit of a built-in advantage or disadvantage sometimes. But she, you know, she was definitely a pipeline to kind of tapping into the kind of expertise that they have and understanding what their needs were. And I think that in any design process, it's absolutely vital to always go through that process in the beginning. You can't just jump right to a patient companion because then it's shallow, and a lot of times you would never even get there. And I think there's a lot of products I could point to out there that you can tell skipped over that first part and just kind of go right to it. But especially in healthcare where, again, empathy is so important and it's such a grave situation, I think that it's so rich with kind of experiences and interactions that you can really tap into that you can't anywhere else. So we really, we did spend a good time with that. I think my biggest difficulty in healthcare as a designer sometimes is that things have to be so anonymous, and we couldn't really engage with patients in hospitals. You know, I had to sign all these forms, and I couldn't really talk to people. I had to just do it. I couldn't take anyone's picture. So it's almost like the unknown person, right, that you're trying to help in a way. And I understand why it is like that, because, you know, if I was sick, I wouldn't want some architect guy asking me a bunch of weird questions either. But I think that it's just challenging sometimes. But at the end, you know, it's very rewarding, and I think that people really respond favorably to it. Honestly, that's why I'm in healthcare. I did design in other areas, and it's very interesting, and I love doing it. But I think that, you know, for me, being in healthcare, a lot of it has to do with just it's such an important part of people's lives that happens so suddenly that you can really make a big impact in it.
Yeah, I have a question generally about like designing a whole space. It seems like in Silicon Valley, like when you get a team together trying to like narrow your scope, pick one problem, let's say like even in healthcare, you're trying to be really specific, and it's easier to sell. It's easier to, I guess, get funding behind something that's really small and like, you know what I'm saying? Versus
yeah,
like
I know very well what you're talking about,
versus
actually.
a whole building that's trying to solve all these problems, and you have to think of the way people move through a building, let alone like all these other things that you're talking about in terms of cleaning and just usability.
Right.
So like, I don't know, is that frustrating just to be thinking that comprehensively and like knowing that the reception of it will probably be weaker because of it?
Right. Yeah, I think as an architect, that's the way you're trained, though, because you are designing a building, and a building encompasses a lot of things. So I think that's why we approached it in that way. And what's happened is that the project or the kind of the place acts as this vehicle for all these somewhat small interventions, right, that you could do anywhere. You can extract them from this kind of larger vision of something. And that's not where we started, but that's what it's become. And I think it really, it's a powerful tool to use to kind of discover new things that can be extracted and help. But it really is difficult to sell it, because we have people that come in and are like, so are you guys trying to sell us patient rooms? Like, what's the deal with this, right? And it's that was never the point, right? And it's more of kind of a think tank approach, a conceptual exercise that kind of yielded all this content, right, out of this kind of one simple question. So the answer is yes and no. Yes, it's difficult to sell it, but no, I think that really has a lot of value at kind of a micro level and also a macro level when you look at it.
We have time for one more question. Who wants to be the last one? Somebody wants to go?
Nobody asked why is the room white yet.
Yeah.
I guess I can ask that first. Why is the room white?
Yeah, okay, all right, good. So we that's like the number one. Second question after this thing costs $1 million, right? So or bazillion, I guess. But the room is white, and it wasn't just to give it this kind of like futuristic sheen or kind of a shallow aesthetic approach. It was actually that we saw white as the best color to bounce light off of. So we could use light to transition the space to all these different settings. White is also a great color to identify infection control issues. So I love wood. I love real wood. I don't love fake laminate wood in hospitals because you can't see blood on it, for example. And I've seen that firsthand from having gone through well, I didn't go through it, my wife went through it, but being at 2 childbirths, I want to clarify that this is being recorded. But you know, the flooring, it looks great and it's homey, but I think we designed this space, it's a hospital, you're very sick, and we used it as an opportunity to, even at the aesthetic level, to think about how could it function better with a different kind of modern, clean palette.
It's also associated with cleanliness a lot.
Right, and we wanted the room to look sophisticated and clean, and people like, wow, that looks sterile. And I'm like, no, thank you. You know, it's like, it should look sterile. It's a hospital. So I think that, you know, that was our approach, and it definitely makes it a little bit provocative for people, but I think what's been fantastic about the space in New York is you've had people come there and are like, I was just ready to hate this thing. I saw the pictures. It looks like it's from, you know, Star Trek. But there's a warmth to it when you're there that you maybe don't get from the imagery. And I think that there's a degree of kind of cleanliness and organization to it as well.
All right. Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah,
thank you for letting us talk with you guys.
Thanks for joining us tonight for this edition of Stanford Medicine X Live. We'll see you back here on May 27th, 2014 at 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time when we'll discuss the topic Medicine X, the researcher's perspective. You won't want to miss the next episode of Stanford Medicine X Live. As a reminder, this program is made possible by support from the Stanford University School of Medicine, Department of Anesthesia, Stanford AIM Lab, Stanford Hospital and Clinics, and the Agency for Healthcare Research Quality. If you haven't yet done so, please take a moment to like our YouTube page at www.youtube.com/Stanford Medicine X so you can continue the conversation online and stay informed of program updates. From all of us here at Stanford Medicine X, we want to thank you for joining us today and remind you to join us again next Thursday, May 29th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for another edition of Stanford Medicine X Live featuring a new healthcare design class from the Stanford University School of Medicine called Design for Health. Next week, we are featuring a class with Amy Tendrich from Diabetes Mind and e-patient Alan Brewington. Also, please don't forget that registration for Medicine X 2014 is now open. Don't miss the year's premier patient-centered conference on emerging technology and medicine. Unique opportunities such as our masterclass program and our IDEO Design Challenge workshop have extremely limited space availability. You'll want to make sure to take advantage of these programs while our regular registration pricing is still available until August 1st, 2014. For all of you out there taking time to tune in with us tonight, thank you for joining us and being part of the conversation. A special thanks to our guest speakers this evening. From all of us at Stanford Medicine X, we'll see you next time.